When I think back to my childhood, I can still see every house we lived in. The first was a small duplex. My bedroom was on the lower half of the house, and the living room felt tiny. But that's where my parents began collecting records. I was mesmerized by those album covers, Meatloaf, Donna Summer, the Beatles. They were stacked on the floor, leaning against the table, like colorful doors to other worlds. My uncle, my mom's younger brother, used to visit us there. I was only 2 or 3, my sister still a baby, my brother soon to be born. Even at that age, I remember my father's anger. He would drag my mother by her long hair across the floor. I remember my uncle outside trying to help by babysitting us and taking care of us, and my father shouting cruel things at him. My uncle never forgot those words. He even spoke of them near the end of his life. That duplex was my first memory of feeling afraid. The next house was our first standalone home. We had a front yard, a backyard, and a basement, my first basement. I was 4. It was across the street from my first elementary school. The basement became my hiding place. Behind the furnace, wedged between the washer and dryer, behind boxes I'd arrange myself, anywhere I could disappear when his rages came. I remember one day hiding down there when he threw my sister down the stairs. She landed on the back of her head. My mother begged to go to her, and he forbade her. He threatened me too. If I went to my sister, it would be my turn next. I don't know if she was ever taken to the hospital. I only know that was the house where his spankings became beatings, where the belt became a weapon, where even the wallpaper, the dark green velvet diamonds, burned itself into my memory. Then came the bigger house. On the surface, everything looked better. But that was where another kind of abuse began. I remember the day clearly, a barbecue, the smell of steaks, my father drinking his favorite beer. Later, he made a request that didn't feel right. I was young enough to wonder if it was normal, old enough to know it had to be wrong, especially if it meant to keep it a secret. I even asked him if he was going to do it to my brother and sister, desperate for some sign that was happening to me wasn't wrong. He told me not to tell anyone. He went back to the yard as if nothing had happened. Decades later, when I drove by that same house to photograph it for this documentary, the garage door was open. Inside it was arranged almost exactly as he'd kept it in the early 1980s. Seeing that was like stepping into a time machine built of dread. The next house was newer. My parents had it built. It had a basement too. That's where I practiced dance, ballet, tap, and jazz for hours. Often locked down there until he said I could stop. This was also when he and my mother got into the DJ business, recording records onto cassettes. Singing and dancing weren't allowed unless he allowed it, and violence enforced the rules. Car rides became his new tool, drives to remote places, railroad tracks, anywhere he could act without being caught. Then came the house I call the clicking house. This was the one with the basement he turned into a torture chamber. Preparing that basement became part of his ritual. I remember trying to pry open the small windows, hoping someone might hear or that we might escape. I taught my brother and sister codes disguised as a game of making movies. tap my head meant roll under the bed. A special word meant to hide in the closet. It was my secret way of directing them to safety while pretending to be a film director. Even then, some part of me knew I'd grow up to tell these stories. One day, decades later, I drove up and down the street searching for that house. I couldn't recognize it. I stopped for gas to keep looking. On my second pass, a stranger knocked on my window asking for a boost. As we talked, I explained I was looking for a house I'd lived in as a girl for a documentary. He pointed and said, "Are you sure it isn't that one?" His house. And it was. The very house I'd been searching for. Life had placed me face to face with its new owner. The last house we lived in, with my father, was a small apartment. After so many big houses, this was downsizing. Finances had changed, or maybe the neighbors started noticing. Maybe his secrets were harder to hide. By then I was in grade 4, getting older. I started asking other kids if their dads did things mine did, trying to make sense of what was normal. I had already told my mother once, a few houses ago when I was 7, what he was doing to me, and he had manipulated us both until I recanted. That apartment made it harder for him to act unseen. It was the beginning of the end. I won't tell the full story of the day my mother finally left him at that house. That will be another film. But I can say this. Each of these houses was a chapter. Each room a memory. For me, they are haunted not by ghosts, but by the echo of survival. By the little girl hiding behind the furnace, behind the boxes, directing her brother and sister like actors in a secret film. It was that girl who kept us all alive. And now, decades later, I'm still here, finally telling the story. Houses remember the things we try to forget, the laughter, the anger, the footsteps that never quite fade. Every time I moved, I thought I was leaving pieces of myself behind, but the past always followed. Maybe ghosts aren't people at all, just memories that got too heavy to carry. Going back wasn't about haunting the past. It was about proving I survived it, because every haunted house begins with a heartbeat. Sometimes it's our own.